Well, it's gone from frustrating to just outright bizarre, that being the ever-changing story out of Uvalde, and I understand that investigation into such an event is complicated. Some people see different things, some people say different things, some key evidence isn't even discovered for days or weeks after the fact. Not every change in a story is a sign of something nefarious, but we're at the point where almost every significant point of fact in the story has changed. Sometimes multiple times, sometimes outright reversed. With that consistent pattern, it's hard to be anything but completely cynical. Just consider all the different ways of inconsistency and contradiction before we even get to the new information this week. Recall, the original story was that an armed school resource officer had engaged the shooter in gunfire but failed to stop him. The next day, the story changed to actually there was no school resource officer at all.
Was there a school officer on campus? And was that school officer armed? Because that's what we've been told.
So at this time, no.
Was there an officer?
No.
The day after that, the story changed again to actually there was a school resource officer. He was just off campus at the time, but he then raced to campus upon hearing the 911 call, only to drive right past the shooter and completely miss an opportunity to actually engage him and potentially stop his entry into the school. In changing that particular piece of the story, the Texas Department of Public Safety, DPS, said that prior reports were incorrect.
It was reported that a school district police officer confronted the suspect that was making entry. Not accurate.
That makes it sound like some news agency or some Twitter rumor got it wrong, but the origin of that claim was his agency, DPS. They're the ones who made that report of a school resource officer engagement originally. It wasn't just reported, it was reported by them. And of course, after the shooter entered the building and the classroom, the major remaining question and the entire scandal of the event is why police took about 75 minutes to end it. The original story from DPS was that the incident commander, Pete Arredondo, the chief of the school district police force, ordered everyone on scene to stand down, believing the shooter was barricaded and not active, until Pete Arredondo denied that claim, saying that no such order ever existed and couldn't have because he didn't even know he was the commander on scene to issue such an order. Now, whether or not I'm inclined to believe that, it is a claim with some additional backing. A separate law enforcement source on scene says it's a lie. Arredondo never issued any such order. And how exactly the shooter entered the building is also an ever-changing story. DPS first said a teacher propped open a door and left it open inexplicably, despite that same teacher calling 911 on the shooter at the time, until 4 days later, that teacher, believing she was misrepresented, gave her story publicly and said she did not leave that door open. It was propped open with a rock. She removed the rock and shut the door, ensuring its closure. The door was supposed to lock, but for unknown reasons, it did not. When the teacher contacted DPS, they affirmed her version of events, citing video evidence that shows it. Okay, that is the sort of story mix-up that has me thinking there are more than just mistakes in play here. On what basis, using what evidence did DPS claim that the teacher left the door open? Clearly, it was not talking to the teacher. She would have told them otherwise. Clearly, it was not looking at the video. It would have shown them otherwise. So that can't just be a whoopsie, we got confused. That was a failure to look at the most important pieces of information first, and then just report baseless claims to the public anyway. This is the sort of unreliable, seemingly negligent, fact-flipping context in which this week's new information has to be understood. It's not about maligning investigators, it's just to recognize we are watching a pattern here, and as this story develops, the facts that are flipping are more significant, not less. We're not talking someone wearing a blue t-shirt instead of red or something like that. We're talking fundamental explanations for what happened now being proven false. Prior explanations for the delay in ending the incident, the biggest piece of the controversy, now completely exposed as lies. And there are at least 3 of those prior explanations now exposed. Recall, the original story was that a handful of police officers had almost immediately followed the shooter into the school. They attempted to engage, but were outgunned. School District Chief Arredondo himself called 911, saying the police inside the building lacked firepower. It was their handguns against a shooter with a rifle. And while it does appear that's true at first confrontation, the lack of tactical equipment was an initial explanation for the totality of the 75-minute delay. DPS said the officers needed armor, riflemen, negotiators, resources that weren't immediately available, and that's why the wait. Until Monday, when stills from surveillance video inside the school, now publicly released, showed that all of those things were inside the building for an hour before the door was breached and the incident ended. The images show police at 11:52 posted up with one shield. Another arrived 12 minutes later, plus body armor. 2 more shields still arrived in the following minutes, plus several rifles ready to go nearly an hour before anybody did in fact go at 12:50. Now, to be completely accurate, we don't yet know the armor rating of those vests or shields, at least as far as I've seen. Maybe they would stop rifle fire? Maybe not. But to be fair to the other side of the argument, maybe that doesn't matter at all. Maybe when kids' lives are at risk, you go in with what you've got, regardless. The point is, whatever happened here is clearly not ideal protocol, and the explanation for why it happened is clearly not true. Even if it wasn't ideal equipment, they didn't lack equipment in the way first described. And the second explanation for delay isn't true either. The claim that police tried to breach the door but could not and had to wait for keys. In fact, that was the headline of District Chief Arredondo's interview with the Texas Tribune 2 weeks ago. Waiting for keys, unable to break down doors. Arredondo said the initial officers found the doors locked and described personally desperately attempting to open the classroom doors with keys provided by a janitor. The original 6 he received did not work. It wasn't until later that the proper key was finally found, he said, and the door was unlocked and the incident ended. Except that same surveillance video shows that none of that ever happened at all. The responding officers didn't even attempt so much as a handle jiggle, let alone several different key attempts. They never tried to open the door at all, according to a law enforcement source familiar with the investigation and the footage, as reported in the San Antonio Express News Saturday. And if that apparent lie isn't frustrating enough, additional reporting suggests those keys may never have even been necessary anyway, for 2 reasons. One, because a breaching tool that firefighters use called a Halligan bar was on site, just sitting around for an hour but never deployed. And 2, even more damning, because at least one of those doors into those conjoined classrooms may have been unlocked the entire time, or so investigators now believe. According to that Express News report, the classroom locks at Robb Elementary are designed to lock automatically when they close, and they don't actually have a way to manually lock from the inside. The law enforcement source speaking with the Express News says police might have assumed that the door was locked based on that understanding, but evidence suggests it may have been open the whole time, as confirmed at Tuesday's investigative hearing.
Is there any evidence whatsoever that shows that there was an attempt to open the door or test whether or not it was locked?
We could never see anybody put their hand on the door, and of course up until the breach. And then at the breach, we've gone back and talked to the breachers, re-interviewed the breachers, and they said no, they didn't try the door handle beforehand.
Indeed, if the doors auto-lock on closure, then how did the shooter just open the door right up? Well, maybe that door was propped open too, you might think, but no, surveillance video confirms the shooter opened the door himself. If the shooter could simply open the door, well, then it stands to reason that the police could simply open the door too, absent some sort of manual locking mechanism on the inside, which investigators confirm was in fact absent. And it's very hard not to get tinfoily about all of these supposed to be locked doors that were not in fact locked. How did the shooter just walk through the first door that the teacher checked that was supposed to be locked but wasn't? How did the shooter just walk through the closed classroom door that was supposed to be locked but wasn't? All of that is just simultaneous malfunction, the source quoted by the Express News says. And I suppose if these locks are all managed by some central control system, maybe that makes sense. But it's hard to ignore this malfunction on that day specifically. Had these locks been broken for some time and just nobody noticed? Or did all of these locks just go coincidentally haywire like an Epstein cell camera? But even that is a comparatively minor tinfoil point, because the tinfoil extends to the very methodology of this investigation itself. How exactly did we learn all of these new facts this week? Was there some new witness who suddenly emerged? Was there a breakthrough in forensic evidence on the scene? No. They just looked at the video. They know that they had rifles and shields inside the school for almost an hour before they took out the shooter, because that's on video. They know that nobody tried to open that door for that hour because that's on video. Now, I understand you can't always just release all the video immediately. Investigations have a process, fair enough. But why have investigators been routinely giving information that's contradicted by the video evidence? I'm no crime scene investigator. I can't tell you all the finer details about how to secure and gather and analyze the evidence, but it seems to me that looking at the video has to rank right near step one in that process, and yet looking at the video appears to have been some sort of late stage step. We had investigators telling us things almost a month ago that video shows are not true, and that video has been available to them the entire time. I don't know a way to explain that other than deliberate disregard for the truth. The truth has just been sitting there, and they had no use for it. That says cover up, not investigation. And both the major parties are seemingly a part of it. The establishment of the facts in this story has largely been a finger-pointing battle between Pete Arredondo, the school district police chief, and the Texas Department of Public Safety, issuing competing claims and counterclaims against each other, but they both have provably lied. Arredondo says he tried opening the door multiple times with keys. He did not. DPS has made claims about confronting the shooter and a teacher leaving the door open that were contradicted by video evidence they've had the whole time. And I suppose that doesn't actually require some grand conspiracy theory to explain it. It just requires that everyone involved be allergic to accountability. Hey, don't look over here. It's that guy's fault over there. That's a terrible philosophy for really anything in life, but it's especially terrible in a context where children's lives are on the line. And remember, the only thing that apparently ended it all in this situation was someone finally bucking that attitude. Damn the rules, damn the orders, damn the protocol. I don't care who gets blamed. I just care about stopping this threat. That is the approach that reportedly ended it all when Border Patrol agents made decisions themselves and reported direct defiance of orders otherwise, rather than waiting for someone else to do something and accept the role of scapegoat. At least for now, that is the account. But the way this story has gone, everything I just said will be proven bullshit tomorrow by information that's actually been sitting around for quite a while. It's just that nobody got around to looking at it. And just in case you think you have the time and the curiosity to look at it, too bad. You can't. The city of Uvalde has lawyered up to prevent the release of the evidence that would clear everything up. They have the full collection: body cam footage, photos, 911 calls, emails, text messages, criminal records, and more. They're releasing none of it and plan to fight attempts to access it in court after dozens of records requests have been made, not because the release of those records would compromise the investigation, but just because the materials include, quote, highly embarrassing information. Well, maybe some people need to be embarrassed. Considering the costs that 21 families in Uvalde have incurred, just a little embarrassment seems like a pretty fair price to pay. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Minds, that is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.